History is full of secrets, but some are buried so deep they were never meant to be found. We think of empires as being built with armies and laws, with iron and gold. But what if the greatest tool of control, the hidden key to ultimate authority, was something far more intimate? From the sacred temples of Babylon to the opulent palaces of Rome, ancient rulers discovered a shocking truth. By controlling sex, they could control everything. They could legitimize their rule, terrorize their enemies, and even claim the power of the gods themselves. What you're about to see isn't just about the secret sex lives of emperors and priestesses. It's the story of how human desire was weaponized to build empires and how those explosive secrets still echo in our world today. The altar of the empire, sex as a tool of conquest and control. When we picture the great empires of the ancient world, we see legions marching and walls crumbling. We think of politics as a game of treaties and statecraft. But that picture is dangerously incomplete. The ancients knew that true power wasn't just won on the battlefield. It had to be etched into the minds and bodies of the conquered. The most effective empires in history used sex as a weapon, as a tool of the state, and as the very glue of their imperial machine. They did it in two brutally effective ways, one of hard power to break the spirit, and one of soft power to bind the elite. For the ultimate example of hard power, we have to look at the terrifying efficiency of the Neo-Assyrian Empire. The Assyrians were masters of psychological warfare. Their royal carvings aren't just victory monuments, they're meticulously crafted catalogues of cruelty, designed to be seen and feared. While these records are filled with horrific descriptions of torture and impalement, historians have noted a chilling silence on one particular act: sexual violence. Now, while this doesn't prove it was an official state policy, it raises a disturbing question. Was sexual violence simply so common in the chaos of war that it wasn't worth mentioning? Or was it an unspoken, strategic tool of terror? The rape of a city's women was a symbolic and literal violation of an enemy's society, an assertion of absolute dominance that targeted family, community, and the future itself. In a world where honor and lineage were everything, the threat of this kind of violence could be a powerful weapon to force a city to surrender and break its will to resist. But power isn't always held by the sword. The Persian Achaemenid Empire, the largest the world had yet seen, perfected a much subtler form of sexual politics: the strategic marriage. Where the Assyrians broke societies, the Persians used marriage to absorb them. The king's harem wasn't just for his personal pleasure, it was a critical hub of diplomacy and politics. When a territory was conquered or a local king submitted, he might send a daughter to the Persian capital. This wasn't a punishment, it was an honor. It brought her family into the orbit of the imperial family, giving them status and access to power. In return, the Persian king could give one of his own daughters in marriage to a loyal governor. This created a blood tie, turning a potential rival into family. These unions were the threads in a huge tapestry of control, weaving the elites of dozens of nations, from Greece to India, into a single, loyal imperial class. Perhaps the most famous example of this was staged by Alexander the Great. After conquering the Persian Empire, he held a massive ceremony in the city of Susa. In what became known as the Susa weddings, Alexander and 80 of his top officers all married noble Persian women at the same time. Alexander himself married Statera, the daughter of the defeated Persian king. It was a masterstroke of political theatre. In one day, Alexander symbolically merged the ruling classes of Greece and Persia, uniting conqueror and conquered. He wasn't just claiming the throne, he was making himself a legitimate heir. From the unspoken terror of the Assyrians to the diplomatic web of the Persians, these empires show us a profound truth. They knew that to control a people, you had to control their most intimate bonds. Sex wasn't a private affair. It was an instrument of the state. But politics was just the beginning. To truly secure their authority, rulers had to go one step higher. They had to claim their power came not just from armies, but from the gods themselves. Divine mandate, sacred sexuality, and the power of the gods. In the ancient mind, the earthly and the divine were completely intertwined. The health of the crops and the strength of the kingdom were all direct reflections of the favour of the gods, and that favour was linked to fertility, the power to create life. For a ruler to be seen as legitimate, he had to prove he was the chosen channel for this divine, life-giving energy. He had to become the master of fertility, and one way to do that was by harnessing the power of sacred sexuality. Nowhere is this idea more famous or more controversial than in ancient Mesopotamia. For a long time, historians relying on later Greek writers like Herodotus told stories of so-called sacred prostitutes. The theory was that priestesses in the temples of fertility goddesses like Ishtar would perform sexual rituals to ensure the prosperity of the land. But modern scholars are deeply divided on this. There's very little direct Mesopotamian evidence to support it, and many now believe it was a misunderstanding or an exaggeration by outside observers. What is clear, however, is that these temple complexes were powerful centres of ideology, and the king's patronage of them was crucial. By controlling the rituals associated with fertility, whatever they may have been, the king showed his ability to secure divine favour. His power wasn't just political, it was cosmic. This link between a ruler's virility and the nation's prosperity was taken to its absolute extreme in ancient Egypt. The entire civilization depended on the annual flood of the Nile, and the pharaoh's power was tied directly to this cycle. The pharaoh wasn't just a king, he was a living god, and his sexual potency was believed to directly affect the fertility of the land itself. This was celebrated in huge public events like the festival for the god Min, a deity of fertility always shown with an erect phallus. The pharaoh's personal power was also on display. Pharaohs like Ramses II, said to have fathered over 100 children, were seen as fonts of fertility. In fact, a much later folk tradition claimed that women could become pregnant just by circling his statue. The message was clear. The pharaoh's virility was the land's virility. But power over sexuality could also be shown through its complete denial. In Rome, one of the most powerful groups in the city was a small college of priestesses, the Vestal Virgins. These 6 women were chosen as children to serve Vesta, the goddess of the hearth and home. Their main job was to tend her sacred flame, which was believed to protect Rome itself. To do this, they had to take a 30-year vow of absolute chastity. Their virginity was their power. It was seen as a sacred shield for the entire Roman state. If a Vestal broke her vow, it was a national security crisis, a betrayal that severed Rome's connection to the gods. The punishment was terrifying. To avoid spilling her sacred blood, she was buried alive. In exchange, Vestals were granted privileges unimaginable for other Roman women. They could own property, vote, and write their own wills. A condemned man who crossed paths with a Vestal on the way to his execution was immediately pardoned. The Vestals show us that whether it was through potent expression, like in Egypt, or sacred denial, like in Rome, the principle was the same. Controlling sexuality was a key to unlocking divine and political power. This power placed rulers and priests at the top of their societies. But what happens when that power becomes absolute? When a ruler no longer just channels the gods, but believes he is one. The story then moves from the sacred temple to the profane palace, where sex is twisted into a weapon of personal terror. The decadence of absolute power. Sex as a weapon of fear. There is no better laboratory for absolute power than the Roman Empire. The emperors were, for all intents and purposes, living gods, and for some, that status became a license for depravity on a scale that still shocks us. In their hands, sex stopped being about ritual or diplomacy. It became a theatre of cruelty and the ultimate expression of a terrifying idea that the bodies of everyone in the empire belonged to them. Our knowledge of this comes from ancient historians like Suetonius, who loved a good scandal, so we should be cautious. Some of this might be hostile propaganda. But the stories they told reveal what the Romans feared absolute power could lead to. Take the Emperor Tiberius. He retreated to the island of Capri, which Suetonius paints as a legendary den of perversion. According to the stories, Tiberius preyed on the children of the elite, freeborn boys and girls whose status should have protected them. This wasn't just personal indulgence, it was a calculated act of terror. By violating the children of Rome's most powerful families, Tiberius sent a chilling message. Your status means nothing. Your honor means nothing. I am so far above you that I can take what is most precious to you for my own amusement. His perversions weren't just a private vice. They were a public instrument of political intimidation. His successor, Caligula, took this theatre of degradation and made it a public spectacle. The histories say he had incestuous relationships with his sisters, a profound taboo that showed he was above all mortal laws. But his favourite targets were the senators. At his lavish banquets, Caligula would reportedly inspect the wives of his senators, take them to his chambers, and then return to the table to publicly critique their performance in bed while their husbands sat in humiliated silence. Again, whether these lurid details are literally true or just vicious slander, the message of the stories is consistent. Caligula understood that true dominance was about stripping your rivals of their honor. By sexually degrading their families, he shattered their authority and proved that only one man in Rome truly had power. Then there was the Empress Messalina, wife of the Emperor Claudius. Ancient male historians portrayed her with a sexual appetite so legendary they claim she once competed with a prostitute for 24 hours and won. But is that the whole story? Many modern historians see something else behind the scandalous reputation, a shrewd and ambitious political operator. Messalina likely used her affairs to build a network of allies, rewarding supporters and creating compromising situations for her enemies. Her sexuality was her weapon. Her downfall came when she overplayed her hand, allegedly marrying her lover while Claudius was out of town in a bid to overthrow him. It was a fatal mistake. She was executed, and the Senate ordered her memory to be erased from all public records. From Tiberius's hidden terror to Caligula's public humiliation, the Roman imperial court reveals the dark endpoint of the link between sex and power. When power becomes absolute, the most intimate parts of human life become just another resource to be exploited, for pleasure, for profit, and for the terrifying assertion of total control. From the statecraft of the Persian court to the sacred rites on the Nile and into the depraved heart of the Roman palace, one explosive truth is laid bare. Ancient civilizations knew that human desire wasn't just a personal matter. It was a force that could be channeled, weaponized, and manipulated to build and shatter empires. It was the hidden key. Control sex through ritual, and you could claim the authority of the gods. Control it through marriage, and you could bind the world's elite in loyalty. Control it through violence and humiliation, and you could crush the will of your enemies. These stories aren't just shocking footnotes from a distant past, they're a stark reminder that the clash between desire, authority, and control is a timeless human drama. The echoes of these ancient secrets are still heard today, in the halls of political power, in the dynamics of social control, and in the enduring struggle over who has the right to govern our most intimate lives. The ancient world hid these truths in plain sight, and they are as powerful now as they were thousands of years ago. If you found these hidden truths of history as shocking as we did, be sure to hit that like button, subscribe, and ring the bell for more revelations they try to erase. And let us know in the comments below which ancient civilization's use of sex and power shocked you the most.